The United States government is spending 40% more than it is taking in, right now, today, not as a projection, as a documented operating reality. And the number that most people are not looking at, the number that the people who study financial history say is the most dangerous signal in the entire macro picture right now, is not the stock market. It is not the crypto market. It is not even inflation. It is the interest payment on the national debt. And what that number is doing right now should concern every single person who has money in any asset class, including crypto. Let us build the full picture, because the individual numbers are alarming enough, but assembled together, they tell a story that most financial media is not putting in a single place for people to actually see. The United States national debt as of April 2026 is $39 trillion. The federal budget deficit in fiscal year 2026 is projected at $1.9 trillion. That means the government is borrowing $1.9 trillion this year just to cover the gap between what it spends and what it collects. The U.S. government borrowed an average of $43.5 billion every single week in the first 4 months of fiscal year 2026. Now here is the number that makes all of those figures more serious. The United States paid $970 billion in interest costs in 2025. In 2026, net interest payments are projected to reach $1 trillion annually. By 2036, the Congressional Budget Office projects those interest payments will reach $2.1 trillion per year. $1 trillion per year, just in interest, not paying down the debt, not funding any program or service, just servicing the interest on money that has already been borrowed and spent. Interest costs are now the second largest spending category for the federal government, outpacing everything except Social Security. The United States is spending more on debt interest than on defense, more than on Medicare, more than on education, infrastructure, and every other discretionary program combined. Bridgewater Associates founder Ray Dalio has warned of an impending economic heart attack, saying the country is spending 40% more than it takes in, and describing interest payments as plaque in the arteries, squeezing away buying power. Now, let us compare this to 1929, because the comparison is important, and it requires honesty about what was different and what is worse. In 1929, the United States had virtually no national debt relative to its economy. The government's debt to GDP ratio was approximately 16% when the Great Depression began. That meant the government had enormous fiscal space to respond. It could borrow aggressively. It could fund relief programs. It could implement the New Deal. It had room. Today, federal debt held by the public is 101% of GDP in 2026. The Congressional Budget Office projects it will reach 120% of GDP by 2036, surpassing the previous record of 106% set just after World War II. In 1929, when the crash came, the government could borrow its way to a solution. Today, the government is already borrowing $1.9 trillion per year, and the borrowing is accelerating. A committee for a responsible federal budget analysis shows the average interest rate paid on national debt could exceed the economic growth rate starting in 2031, risking a debt spiral where interest costs increase interest rates, depress growth, and depressed growth further increases interest costs. A debt spiral. That is the technical term for what happens when a borrower's interest payments grow faster than their income. It's what happened to Greece in 2010. It's what happened to Argentina multiple times across multiple decades. It is what the CBO is projecting as a mathematical possibility for the United States before 2035 if nothing changes in fiscal policy. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2026 identified economic downturn as witnessing one of the largest increases in severity score compared with the prior year, exploring how mounting debt sustainability concerns coupled with potential economic bubbles could herald a new phase of volatility, potentially further destabilizing societies and businesses. The United Nations projects world output will slow to 2.7% in 2026, below the pre-pandemic average of 3.2%. Global trade is projected to slow as temporary drivers fade and trade barriers and policy uncertainty persist. The unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds has been above 10% and rising for 6 months. Once revisions are in, 2025 is likely to be the worst year for job growth outside a recession in decades. Now here is where the picture gets specifically relevant for crypto holders, because this is not a video designed to scare you into selling everything. It's a video designed to help you understand why the macro environment we are in is structurally different from anything most living investors have seen, and what that means for how you hold, how you position, and what role digital assets actually play in this environment. Let us look at what happened in 1929 versus what is different now. In 1929, the crash was a liquidity crisis. Banks called loans, asset prices collapsed, people couldn't access their money. The government was slow to respond. By the time the New Deal arrived, the damage was catastrophic. 25% unemployment, banks failing by the hundreds, a decade of depression. The tools available to governments today are different. The Federal Reserve can create liquidity through quantitative easing. It can cut interest rates. It can intervene in bond markets. It did all of this in 2020 and produced the fastest recovery from a market crash in modern history. The same tools exist today. But here's the problem. Those tools have a cost, and the cost is inflation and currency debasement. Every dollar the Federal Reserve creates to solve a liquidity crisis is a dollar that dilutes the purchasing power of every existing dollar. Every round of quantitative easing transfers wealth from savers and fixed income holders to asset owners. The people who own real assets, property, equities, commodities, and increasingly digital assets see their holdings appreciate in nominal terms. The people who hold cash see their purchasing power erode. This is why the institutions that understand monetary history are not hiding in cash. Geoeconomic confrontation was selected as the top risk most likely to trigger a material global crisis in 2026 by 18% of respondents in the World Economic Forum survey. And the institutional response to geoeconomic confrontation, historically, is diversification away from the assets that are most exposed to sovereign credit risk and currency debasement. Bitcoin was created in 2008 in direct response to the financial crisis. The Genesis block contains a headline from the Times of London about bank bailouts. It was specifically designed as a hedge against exactly the kind of monetary debasement that follows government debt crises. Its 21 million cap cannot be inflated away. No central bank can print more of it. No government can debase it. These properties become more valuable, not less, in an environment where sovereign debt is growing faster than GDP, and interest payments are consuming an increasing share of government revenue. XRP and XLM operate in a different part of this picture. They are not designed as stores of value against monetary debasement. They are designed as payment infrastructure for the system that processes value transfers between institutions, between currencies, between economies. And in a world where geoeconomic confrontation is the #1 systemic risk, where BRICS nations are building alternative payment corridors, where the SWIFT system is under geopolitical pressure, where 134 countries are building CBDCs that need interoperability infrastructure, the demand for neutral ISO 2022-aligned cross-border settlement infrastructure is not going down, it's going up. The macro environment that most people are looking at as a threat to crypto is actually the macro environment that makes the XRP and XLM thesis more compelling. Not because digital assets are immune to a financial crisis, they are not. A severe liquidity crisis would likely hit all risk assets, including crypto, in the short term. But the medium to long-term response to sovereign debt crises, currency debasement, and geoeconomic fragmentation has historically been a rotation into assets that cannot be debased, cannot be frozen by a single government, and cannot be disrupted by the financial system they were designed to operate around. The 1929 comparison is useful, not because today's situation is identical, but because it reveals the size of the fiscal space problem.
In 29, the government had room. Today, it does not. When the United States entered the Great Recession in 2008, federal debt held by the public totaled 35% of GDP. Today, it's 101%. The next crisis, whatever its trigger, arrives with a government that is already borrowing $1.9 trillion per year, paying $1 trillion in annual interest, and carrying debt at 101% of GDP. That's not a prediction of collapse, it's a description of reduced capacity to respond. And reduced capacity to respond to a financial shock means longer and more severe consequences for the people who are not positioned for it. The people positioned for it are not the ones watching from the sidelines in cash. They are the ones who understood early that the macro environment requires assets that the monetary system cannot debase, and payment infrastructure that the geopolitical system cannot fragment. You are holding some of the
assets right now, in an environment where the numbers above are not projections but documented operating realities. That is not a coincidence. That is positioning. Not financial advice. All economic data sourced from the Congressional Budget Office February 2026 Outlook, U.S. Treasury fiscal data, World Economic Situation and Prospects 2026, World Economic Forum Global Risks Report 2026, and Fortune reporting on the national debt as of May 2026. If this video gave you the macro context that makes your crypto position make more sense right now, hit the like button. Subscribe for the economic analysis, the regulatory tracking, and the market frameworks this community needs. Your comment question this week: after seeing the debt and interest payment numbers, does the macro environment make you more or less convicted and holding scarce digital assets through this cycle? Drop your honest answer below. Stay informed. Stay positioned. The numbers do not lie.